Bethesda was considered to be one of the good video game companies as recently as last year. What a difference 6 months and 2 games can make. In a recent interview with IGN, Todd Howard made some interesting remarks that could be construed as both enlightening, but also very concerning at the same time. The gist of what I am talking about is that they knew Fallout 76 was going to release in a poor state, and they went ahead and shipped it anyway. In this video, we will discuss whether or not this is simply greed, or if it is indicative of the state of the industry as a whole. The entire IGN interview is being aired tomorrow, and I'll make a more in-depth video about it at that time. But the snippets released thus far paint a picture of a Todd Howard who has been humbled by the negative response to Fallout 76, while also indicating that Bethesda knew that this was coming. Honorably, he takes full responsibility for the product that shipped last year, but the concerning part of this interview so far was when he indicated that they knew it would get bad review scores and that it was extremely buggy. Todd's assertion that all live service games go through these growing pains is really just an excuse. Just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean you should too. I'm sure we've all heard that, and it rings true here as well. Yes, he is correct that many other major live service games launched in a deplorable state. So since they did, and some have recovered and are now thriving, that means to Bethesda that it was okay to release Fallout 76 in the state that it was in. I'll wait for the rest of the interview to be released and then we can talk about it as a whole, but it does lead to a broader question about Bethesda, because Fallout 76 doesn't exist in a vacuum. Instead, Bethesda has also released The Elder Scrolls Blades, which has aggressive monetization schemes, unlike say Fallout Shelter. Rage 2 also released with plenty of microtransactions built right into the game. These are departures from the Bethesda we knew less than a year ago. In fact, I made a video specifically about their newfound reliance on microtransactions that you can check out if you're interested. So, what changed? Is Bethesda just greedy now? The short answer, I think, is not necessarily. Instead, what I believe has happened is a result of bad or non-existent marketing and poor public relations decisions which have led to Bethesda's games selling poorly for several years in a row now. First, over the last few years, whenever a new Bethesda published game was released, there wasn't hardly any marketing push associated with it. Only recently with Rage 2 has Bethesda's marketing machine for a game not named The Elder Scrolls or Fallout gone into high gear. The Evil Within 2, Dishonored 2, the Prey reboot, the Wolfenstein games, and even Doom in 2016 didn't receive the marketing needed to ensure people were aware that these games were releasing, and that they were all very good games. It's almost as if Bethesda was hoping Twitter, good reviews, and good word of mouth would propel these games to much better sales numbers. Instead, they further sabotaged these games by instituting a review policy that would send game codes to reviewers on the day of release or the day before at best. What this did was encourage potential buyers to wait for reviews of these games, and by the time reviews finally came out, what little hype there was for these games had died down. The result was that any players interested in the game would likely only have to wait a few more weeks and buy it on sale, if they purchased it at all. Bethesda has since changed this policy as of last year, with Pete Hines, Bethesda's SVP of marketing, stating, quote, "We did it the first time because there was the whole thing about transparency and companies needing to be transparent. We were like, well, you want us to be transparent, this is what we're doing." Then it ended up being the focal point, and honestly, we were tired of reading reviews where the first paragraph spent more time talking about our review policy than the game. So we decided we're not going to keep drawing attention to it, we'll send out copies and maybe people will start talking about the game instead of talking about policies. So we did." End quote. But the damage was likely already done. Several years of underperforming releases has likely forced a change at Bethesda that could be unrelated to the quality of their games at all. All of the major games Bethesda has published over the last several years, with the exception of Fallout 76, have received positive to very positive critical and player reviews. With years of titles underperforming, it is likely that Bethesda's parent company, ZeniMax Media, has applied pressure to their studios to find ways to ensure that games released have an additional reliable source of revenue beyond just the initial sale of the game itself. Prior to Fallout 76, most Bethesda games didn't even offer microtransactions at all. Bethesda was years behind other publishers on this front. With the release of Fallout 76 and the Atom Shop, The Elder Scrolls Blades, and now Rage 2, Bethesda has signaled that they are heading in a new direction when it comes to monetization. It is true that the costs of game development have continued to increase nearly exponentially, with the sale price of games stuck at $60. The arms race in major game development these days means that developers and publishers have to find other ways of recouping costs, even if it means making that money a year or more later down the road. The main part of Todd Howard's interview that concerns me, so far anyway, was his seemingly cavalier attitude about releasing a game that was clearly not in any state to be released. At this point, it isn't even cynical to say that they knew it was in a poor state and they wanted to release it to make money on it anyway. With no reviews available since it was a live service game, there was no way for consumers to know what they were really getting. From this perspective, it is hard to argue that ZeniMax and/or Bethesda weren't simply just being greedy and knew several million people would buy Fallout 76 sight unseen. The most troubling part about this is that they were directly taking advantage of fans of the Fallout series or fans of the company's games in general. Bethesda cultivated a track record of solid games that were a good value for your money going back for years. Until Fallout 76 released, Bethesda Game Studios was one of those developers that you knew were going to deliver a game that you'd enjoy for many dozens or hundreds of hours, even if there were some bugs here and there. Even with Fallout 4, I personally spent several hundred hours exploring and enjoying that world, and while it wasn't an earth-shattering change from Fallout 3, it was well worth the $60 I spent on it on day one, as was Skyrim, Fallout 3, and Oblivion. This is also to say nothing about the high quality of Bethesda as a publisher's releases over the last several years. So to look at the consumer and say, well, you should have waited for reviews, yeah, that is true, but I don't blame anyone that simply thought that Bethesda would treat such a beloved franchise, as well as their fans, with care. In the end, it is possible that ZeniMax forced the game to be released. After all, they are Bethesda's parent company, and this is nothing new, especially in the games industry. It is entirely conceivable that Todd Howard and his team said that the game would not be ready, and they were simply overruled. If that is the case, we wouldn't ever know about it, but Howard may be doing these kinds of interviews mainly as an "I told you so" to the others making those decisions. The other side of the coin is that Bethesda thought what they were doing was okay, which is what Todd Howard seems to be saying in this interview, and that is highly concerning to me. At this point, all we can do is hope that they have seen the error of their ways. Howard states that he believes the poor reception to Fallout 76 has damaged both the Fallout brand as well as Bethesda as a whole, and I would agree with that 100%. I see it in the comments on my videos, for my small YouTube channel, that people will refuse to buy a Bethesda game day one because of this situation, and I don't blame them at all. The sample size I have access to is a tiny fraction of people who buy and play Bethesda games, so he is absolutely right that this debacle will hurt the sales of future games. So then, is Bethesda simply greedy now? I honestly don't think so. I think that they had a moment of carelessness, maybe mixed with some greed. I think that the desire to get a new Fallout game out and the naive assumption that players and press would go a bit easier on it since it was a live service game was a very misguided calculation that has backfired on them tremendously. E3 is right around the corner, and the new games Bethesda announces, coupled with the monetization schemes that they may be pushing, will give us a better idea of what kind of video game company Bethesda is going to be moving forward. Do you believe that Bethesda was simply being greedy launching Fallout 76 when they did? Was it a misguided mistake? Let's discuss in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Maybe click that bell icon. And as always, thank you so much for watching.